Well, hello, hello, hello. You are listening to the No Brainers Empowering Possibilities show. These are dialogues of encouragement with fresh perspectives, invitations to ahas, a little bit of science, a dash of behavioral psychology, and a whole lot of creative fun. So if leveling up is on your radar, my friend, you are at the right show. I'm your host, Roseanne Marsh, author of the teen and parent empowerment curriculum called Level Up. And you are listening to episode number 25, small micro actions we can do to process grief of a loved one or of a living loss. Have any of you ever experienced the loss of someone that's important to you? Or have you ever experienced the loss of like a pet or a job or finances or your sense of safety? At the time of your loss, how would you describe the intensity of your grief? And how have you moved on from that grief? Well, it's inevitable that sometime in our life, we will lose someone who is dear to us. And we will also suffer losses, whether it be jobs, security, the love of someone in a material possession, a divorce, even the feeling of peace can be something that we can lose. Losses are a jolt to the heart, mind, body, and soul. Whether this is the loss that we saw coming or one that just happened suddenly, we had to process physically and mentally and emotionally the change that we now have to go through. And it's not just the loss of the person or the finances. This is the big one. It's the loss of the role that played in our life and the role we played with that life. We are no longer now the daughter or the wife or the friend or whatever. So whether we gift ourselves the help of a great therapist or a therapy group, or choose to surround ourselves with like loving friends, or just do it alone, there are micro actions that we can take, just small little micro actions that we can take that can help us maneuver through the avalanche of possible emotional scenarios. So with the recent passing of my father just a few days ago, I felt inspired to research the tools that I could use to help me get through the grieving process. And what I found were some really amazing things that can really help us through everyday life. And I was excited to share with you today. So it's really part of the plan that we should have relationships, to grow and develop from relationships, to have close relationships. And then at some point we say goodbye, either because of death of a loved one or the separation of that relationship. So I think that we're not going to get out of this life without dealing with change and loss. It would be illogical and probably even a little bit unrealistic to think that way. Because when you look at the counterbalance of life, to have gain, we must have loss. And to have joy, we must have grief. It's not fun to think of it that way, but there is a balance to life. And the extent that we have grief towards something has a lot to do with the extent that we had love for that thing. So there's many things that I hold tightly to me that are precious to me, that are pure and simple, like people and relationships. And to lose those relationships comes up with emotional and physical pain. But I've also thought about what are the things that I'm holding so tightly to that are of material nature, that I could become less dependent upon and less addicted to, so that if the time came that I had to let go of it, I wouldn't have to suffer so much. But that, of course, that's a show in itself, right? But with loss comes extreme emotions. The grieving process has been defined in like 3 steps, 5 steps, 7 steps. But one thing is for certain, it's not the same for anyone. And there's no graduation from, okay, I made it through that process, so now I'm on to that one. We bounce through different other sets. But what was interesting to me was to at least read through the different steps of the grief process, so I could recognize that I'm not alone in feeling these things, or these are possibilities that I might feel. So I wanted to go briefly through the 7 steps of grief. But then I want to move you into what I feel is even more impactful. But what this is, as you listen to this, see if maybe you have felt these things when you have gone through grief in your life. The first one is shock. Often, like, there's this sense of numbness and a soft protective detachment that we get from the feelings because they're just too intense to deal with. And people in shock appear to be behaving normally, but without a lot of emotion, and because the news hasn't really fully sunk in. The second way we demonstrate grief is through denial, a stage. Many people experience denial after loss, and they know it's a reality, but it just doesn't feel real. And this could include you have forgetfulness, there's lack of concentration, there's sleeplessness, lack of motivation, repetitive thoughts, and just the inability to make decisions. The third stage of grief is anger. And again, we don't move necessarily in this, we bounce back and forth through all of these, maybe go through some of them 15 times. But we could be angry for many reasons. One is that we lost someone or something in our life, or our anger or resentment could be towards those people that are saying, you need to move on, you need to get over it, why don't you get a life, etc. So the fourth is bargaining. And now this one was interesting to me. So this is where we have a sense of, maybe I could have done things differently. I wish I'd intervened in a certain way. I wish I would have done different medical things. I wish I'd seen the writing on the walls. And then we become consumed with those thoughts of what if. The fifth one is depression. So with that mix up of all kinds of emotions that comes with grief, it usually happens in the loss process. It can lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, feelings of dread, and isolation. And this is when it's really important to reach out for other people. The sixth is acceptance and hope. Acceptance is about realizing you can't change the circumstances, but we can gain control over how we respond. At times, we may need to distract ourselves from grief so that we can actually deal with it a little bit. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the seventh is processing grief. So how do we process through it? And that's really where I want to focus today. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. There's no quick fix. And the healing process varies from one person to another, but there are some strategies that we can use to help us through that grieving process. Those are definitions of identified stages of grief. And maybe as you listen to those, you thought, oh, you know what? And what I went through, I went through that, and I went through that. And some of you have maybe gone through all the steps. But I recognize that when my mother passed away 19 years ago, I think I was in the denial stage for many, many years. And I feel like part of that was because I didn't understand the importance of being able to process my feelings. I didn't realize that by burying my feelings, by pretending that they weren't there, that I was just creating havoc with my body and with my ability to feel on a grander emotional scale. So you've heard the term, you have to feel it to heal it. And feel it isn't always fun, right? If we live in a world of numb and denial and refuse to go to the depths of feeling and crying and grieving, we can't feel the opposite side of the stick. We live in like this short range of emotions. So to the depth that I can feel is to the heights to which I can feel. And we live in a society, oh man, that's made it so convenient for us not to feel. If I were the opposition, okay, let's call it what it is. If I were the adversary, I would want people to not feel. I would want them to not identify their feelings. I would want them to be numb. I would not want them to heal. Now, are you getting what I'm saying here? We are given the opportunities to have huge swings of emotions. We're going to have hurts. We're going to have trauma. We're going to have betrayal. We're going to have grief, but we're also going to have love, and we're going to have joy, and we're going to have happiness. But if we're stuck in a society of numb, we miss out on those highs. We miss out on those amazing feelings. So yeah, if I were an adversary, I wouldn't have people feel during grief. I'd have them numb and divert. But that's not what works. We have to feel it to heal it. So there's value in being able to identify how we're feeling, because when we identify it, we can label it, and then we can choose if we want to move on. This is all about agency. We can stay in a certain emotion and we can choose to stay there, or we can choose to do these little micro actions that can help tiptoe us towards something different. And that's what I wanted. When my father died just days ago, I thought, I need an arsenal of tools. What are those things that are going to help me thrive through this process of grief? So our ability to choose, our agency is taken away when we become addicted to substances, numbing mechanisms, thought loops. You got to love those thought loops, right? Those thought loops of guilt, and I don't deserve, and those what ifs, and I should have, and regret. And then that just pushes us towards the numbing mechanisms. And then we don't deal with reality. So, and we do have to have some diversion though. I want to add that in there. There are times when we just have to divert from it, because life really is that heartbeat, that up and down, that up and down. There are times when we're going to be up, and there's times when we're going to be down, and it's okay if we're down. We just need to know how to get back up. So can I go a little bit sciencey here for a moment? Grief and fear are very similar emotions. In fact, they're almost like conjoined twins when it comes to the grieving process. And the grief and the fear are in that center of the brain. It's in the amygdala. So what happens in the amygdala is that when strong feelings come up, it gets the adrenals involved, and it fills the body with cortisol. And that's because we're in that fight and flight. We're in that sympathetic nervous system, right? But unlike fear, fear will dissipate. Grief can be long-term. And so it fatigues our pancreas, etc., because it's filling us with cortisol. And so the pancreas is struggling to produce insulin. It can result in weight gain because your cells are crying out for energy. And there's like the munchies and wanting food and energy. There's like a suppressed immune system with insulin levels that are so high, and it makes us more susceptible to colds and contagious illnesses. We get digestive problems because, when you go into fight and flight, the digestive, it closes down because it's trying to give the extremities the energy. And then there's heart disease from continued cortisol in your body. That really is a stage to set us up for like a heart attack or a stroke. So there's an advantage of being able to move through grief, physical, a mental, and emotional reason. But any of you that have experienced a loss and have moved through that process have probably come out with a perspective that you never would have had you not experienced it. Who can understand better what it's like to lose a child than someone who's lost a child, right? Who could understand the identity loss of someone who just lost their job that they've held for 20 years? When we look at these hard things that we go through, our mind and body have to be able to process it through a time span. But as we allow ourselves to walk forward, creating a new life, a new role, a new opportunity, we move on to perspective and wisdom and the knowledge and an understanding that only comes through experiencing these losses. Now, there's a psychologist, J. William Worden, who provides a framework of 4 tasks that help us understand how people journey through grief. When I ran into his work, I was just really drawn to it because I thought, these are the 4 places I really want to focus, because healing happens gradually as we address these 4 tasks, but there's no specific order. Just like in the stages of grief, there is no specific order. We might go back and forth from one to another. But as I saw the titles of these, so resonated with me that I wanted to share this, but also I wanted to put my own definition on it, because I feel that things may happen that are beyond our control. And it's about how do we react to those things that have happened when we've had no control. So here is psychologist William Worden's 4 categories, but I'm going to put my own little spin on them. Task number 1 is accept the reality of the loss. Although we may know intellectually that the person has passed on, or the divorce has really happened, or the finances have collapsed, or whatever it is that we need to be able to take in, we need to take it into our whole being and accept the reality that it has happened. A lot of times it isn't until situations happen that we get it reaffirmed time and time and again, like when holidays come and that person was a part of that holidays, and then there's that missing, that they're not there. I know when I went through a divorce, the time that the reality was even more stark was holidays, and I sent my children off to go someplace else to celebrate. But this is the time when we really need to have rituals. I love the work of Julia Samuel. I read a little bit of her book. And for any of you out there that are grieving or need help in process of grieving, she has beautiful works and books out there. But she talked about the importance of rituals. For example, having a funeral in this country, in this world, has been over 6,000 years that they've been doing that. And that's a time when we can mark the death of someone, when we can say prayers, when we have rituals to honor the dead. And it really helps us face the reality of the death. And more importantly, it connects us to a community of friends and family that love that person and that love us. And a ritual might be just gathering close friends and discussing what loss has happened to us, but helping us recognize the reality of the loss and start to process it mentally and emotion so that our body can go through that. So the first one was, the first task that we need to do when we're grieving is to accept the reality of the loss. The second one is to process the pain of the grief. Grief is really experienced emotionally and cognitive and physically and spiritually. And people may be saying, get over it and move on and be strong. But in contrast, one of the aims of grief support is the courage to facilitate self-expression, safe expression of all the natural grief reactions, and finding that one person who you can absolutely trust to be able to safely express everything that you're feeling, because we know how important emotional work is invaluable. Another way is to journal. I think journaling is a powerful way to get emotions out. It's a powerful way to be able to express, a powerful way to give voice to the wounds and the hurts. In Level Up, we say, it's Level Up Empowering Possibilities. We say, if your expression is repressed, it will have to be readdressed again and again in the future. I'm going to say that again. So if your expression is repressed, it will have to be readdressed again and again in the future. We need to be able to get it out. And there are books out there like Feelings Buried Alive, Never Die, that many of you are familiar with. And that gives voice to the hurts and the wounds, because if we can feel it, we can heal it. And it doesn't mean it's a singular process that we're going through. It's just like that onion, we're maybe going to peel off one layer, and then there's going to be another layer under that, and we continue. But here's the thing, even though we're addressing those hard things, we're progressing forward. We're going forward. So here's some of those micro actions that we can do. Obviously, journaling was one of them, having those rituals, but here's some others, that micro actions that we can do to help us through grief. Really powerful one is exercise. Do some sort of action, even if it's just getting up and walking, even if it's, our body and our mind are so connected. It's so real that what the mind does, it affects the body. Then also what the body does affects the mind. So when we get out there and walk or run or punch something or dance or sing while we dance, we affect the mind. And that's a way for us to lift our mood. And music is so fast. It's one of my favorite things. And when we put physical action to it, we lift our mood into a level of consciousness that makes us better problem solvers. more so than we're in those lower vibrations, where like grief and agony and sadness. When we're down there, we don't have the clarity that we have when we can alter our state. So just getting our body moving, even if it's just simple, even if it's 5 minutes, those small micro things that we can do to make a big difference in the long run. Another one is breath work. This is huge. And we talk about that a lot in every single chapter of Level Up, because for every emotion, there's a breath pattern to it. So there's a breathing pattern to grief. So if I said, what does grief breathing pattern look like? It might be lots of exhales, but not a lot of inhale, right? But if I said, okay, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and then breathe out for 6. Try that. In for 4, hold for 4, and out for 6. And I had to do that 10, 15 times. There is a calm that comes over the body because the body reacts to the breathing pattern, and then the emotions follow the breathing pattern. Our body and our minds are spectacular. So another way that we can make that micro action that can help us with grieving is to do little random acts of kindness, to try to do it, bring a smile to the face of someone else, even when we don't feel like smiling. But when you do something for someone else, it is a win-win, because it's not only helping them, but in a roundabout way, it gives us that endorphin lift that takes us to that higher level. And remember, there's higher cognition. There's ability to have a clarity to problem solve when we get above the level of boredom. So another another micro is appreciate things. Notice the world around you, and at least 5 minutes a day. Okay, you know that saying that if we live in the past, we can go into depression. If we worry about the future, we can live in anxiety. But in the present tense, we have more control than any other tense, not the past, not the future, the present tense. And if we take 5 minutes to breathe in the moment, when we can learn to stay in the present, we have more control over our life because we can do something in the present. If we go into gratitude, and when we focus on something that is good, remember, what we focus on grows, right? So if we want to live in lack, then we focus on lack. If we want to focus on sadness, then we just think about sadness. But if we want to divert for a moment, even if it's looking for the good, the flowers that are in front of us, I'm saying that because I have flowers in front of me and it brings me so much joy. We can have more clarity just taking that 5-minute breather. There's nothing more powerful than going into gratitude. It could be even that every time I get in the car, I'm going to, right now, before I start the car, I'm going to think of something I'm grateful for. Just getting the body in the habit of going into gratitude. Do you know that muscle memory, if we do that enough, that little micro thing that we do of going into gratitude, every time we get in the car and close the car door and go, oh, my gratitude thing, our body will learn that muscle memory, and it'll start taking us into a place of gratitude. Is that the coolest thing ever? Anyway, that's one of those things that I definitely want to start doing. Okay, so we learned that the first task is to accept the reality of loss. The second is to process the pain. Task 3 is to adjust to the world without the deceased. Okay, the first thing would be to have goals. This is another micro thing we can do. Have goals to look forward to. Think of a goal that you're aiming for and then do that one thing to get it started. You know, maybe you want to learn how to garden, so you sign up for a gardening class online, or you go down to the local nursery and just take one class. Have things to look forward to. From the small and the simple things, great things happen. And if it's something you look forward to, and if it's even a tiny little minuscule thing, even if you don't do it completely if you do a couple minutes of it every day, In the long period, we know the exponential growth that can happen. Another thing is connecting with other people, making time for people who really matter to you and those who can relate to what you're experiencing. There are support groups out there where there's positive processing of emotions. There, they absolutely understand what you've gone through because people have gone through similar things. Another micro would be that would give maybe a macro result would be a part of something that's bigger than yourself. Like giving your time to support a good cause and be a part of something bigger than what you could create on your own. What I do know is that when we're willing to just step out of our box, step out of our comfort zone, just even a little bit, we could learn what our piece could be in a cause that could be a huge ripple effect, a collective ripple, not only on our community, but the society, or maybe the world. But it can also open up doors that absolutely we wouldn't even know about had we not just given that little bit of stepping forward to become a part of something bigger than ourselves. The fourth task is to find an enduring connection with the deceased. Okay, I was really excited to talk about this because 19 years ago, when my mother had cancer and she was passing away, she said to me, Roseanne, whatever you do, make sure that you have a picture of me in your home. I was like, sure, Mom, we will. Absolutely. And I had a picture of my son and my mom, and it was displayed there. And then when we had to remodel, I packaged everything up, but I couldn't find her picture. And when we came back to move back into the house, I was cleaning out underneath the stairs. And I found this picture without the frame in a plastic bag. And I talked to the contractor. He said, I know nothing about it. Nobody knew anything about it. This picture was still on the job site, but somehow it had been preserved in a plastic bag. Then enter the movie Coco. And if any of you have seen the movie Coco, it talks about in the Latino world, the Day of the Dead. And there's this adorable young 12-year-old who wants to be a musician. And on the Day of the Dead, everybody has the pictures of their relatives. So the relatives can come through. And they have one picture of a relative and the head is ripped off. So nobody knows who this relative is. And this young boy who wants to be a musician is transported into the realm of the dead, only to find out that this relative isn't going to be able to come through if there isn't a picture of him. Now, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to let you see all the rest of it. That movie seemed to come through the screen at me and tell me that it was so critical that I be surrounded by pictures of my relatives. Now, I've had some really exquisite experiences of knowing that even though my loved ones have passed on, that they are just a vibration away, that they are very close by. My mother leaves pennies. And when my dad was passing away the other day, I said, don't leave pennies, Dad, because I'll get confused between you and Mom. And maybe many of you have had those experiences of knowing that the other side is very close and working with you. That is my belief system. And I think it would be very hard if I didn't know that there was life after death. But my belief is that there is, and the circumstances that I've had have allowed me to know that I can have a relationship with those that have passed on, even if they are not here in the physical. As I've pondered the reality of losing my father, one of the overarching thoughts I've had in my mind is, what can I do? How can I live my life right now that would honor the legacy of the lessons he taught and the examples he left? What would bring joy to my life and those around me and stand as a legacy for what he stood for? And I had a good relationship with my father. So there are many things that he espouses that I want to incorporate in my life. But I knew that if I could have some tiny micro actions that I could do that could help me through the grief process, but also improve my life, why would I not want to do them? So learning how to take a break from my emotions. I'm just embarking in this grief of losing my parent, my father. And there are many things in my life that I have lost, but by small, simple things done consistently, by feeling the feelings, by feeling it to heal it, by allowing patience with emotions, by learning how to take a break with those emotions when I need to, and to use those little micro actions to take me to a higher level of clarity, I'll be able to not only move on, because it's not about forgetting, right? It's just about honoring, but it's about moving through. And by doing so, I'm going to gather experience along the way that can only fortify me, can fortify who I am. So my heart goes out to those of you who are living with some very raw losses. I'm coming off of one right now, or just embarking in one. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, and we will all do it differently, but know that there are those around you who love you, who are there for you when you're ready to reach out. We are the creators of our life, and we decide what we create. I hope some of these tips and reminders can serve as a solace or a direction, or even one little micro step for you in the direction of healing. Thank you for joining me here today. I'm so very grateful that you came, and I hope there was a piece here that was meant just for you. I know there are many things that I needed to hear as I embarked in my healing journey. Love to all of you. Thank you.